Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, May 14th, 2020. Time for another show, despite the fact that my microphone wanted to fight with me about whether or not I want to do mute or unmute. One of the hottest topics of the day for everybody who now in the era of the Zoom meeting, always remember to unmute your microphone when it's time for you to speak. Time for yet another show, as I just previously mentioned. So far, we haven't gotten this one off the ground yet. So let's start. Daily Coast Radio is live now. We are reminded all the way from Portland, Maine, thanks to Bill, every morning. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, reminds you that everything Trump says or tweets, Obamagate, parenthetically speaking, is a distraction from the fact that he's on the cusp of killing 100,000 people through negligence. Have a nice day. Thank you. Yes. We'll try and do that. And that is where we are. Our worldometer counters have us topping 85,000 and at the moment just short of getting to, I guess we'll hit 86,000 early on in the day. Poised to get past 87,000. I have noticed a longer lag and a longer slowdown. I mean, this is actually good news. Ordinarily, we see a lag in catching up with the reporting of the statistics on Worldometer over the weekend, and I allowed for some extra time given the fact that it was Mother's Day weekend, and I thought that perhaps people would be even busier with other distractions other than counting up our statistics on coronavirus. But we're well past that now. It is Thursday, and the next weekend is approaching. I would say that it's been a noticeably slower week in the worst possible column, or perhaps I guess if you're talking about slowing down, the best possible column. The deaths in the United States have been coming slower. We've been warned to anticipate deaths rising by June, or at least by the end of June, to perhaps 3,000 a day across the United States. We had gotten used to numbers in the 2,500 a day range when New York's, the greater New York, or perhaps the Northeast, was at the peak of its outbreak and having the most difficulty. But that came down a bit to the 2,000 or so a day range, which is, of course, outrageous and incredible and should never have been countenanced in this country with the greatest medical system in the world, et cetera, richest country in the world, all the various things we like to, the praise we like to heap on ourselves. But over the Mother's Day weekend, of course, the weekend numbers tend to lag and drop, and we were considerably, I think, below 2,000 or so per day, and that has persisted through the week. So it could be a sign that things are, it could be a sign that things are on the mend, or it could be a sign that the areas now moving into the danger zone are more sparsely populated, certainly more sparsely populated than New York. Almost everybody's more sparsely populated than the New York metropolitan area. Which will keep numbers down, which will want to make the president happy, and maybe he'll be less angry and find himself less interested in making up conspiracy theories to try to distract from things. But I have a feeling that we may see other hot spots making up for the absence of the New York and Northeastern outbreak. As we learned this morning, let's see, some video circulating on the internet and on Twitter this morning of bars that reopened in Wisconsin last night as the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, dominated as it is by Republicans, opted to reverse the Democratic governor's stay-at-home orders with no alternative in mind, by the way, just simply vacating the governor's orders No one is sure where things stand. No one is sure whether counties retain the right to try and impose their own modified stay-at-home orders or not. And so everything was wide open, at least for one night. And, well, Wisconsinites packed the bars. And I guess in about 2 weeks, we'll find out whether any of the people that they packed the bars with were carrying the coronavirus with them and passing it on to their neighbors. We've already seen spikes in Wisconsin following the forcing of live in-person voting for their primary. We've seen a traceable but smaller outbreak that can be traced back to their protests in the Capitol. So, the whole thing we learned about germ theory seems to be holding true, and now we have to wait about 2 weeks, I guess, to see what the impact of opening up bars, where what's happening there is happening all over the country. Florida beaches, as you know, have been open for a while. They were reporting July 4th and Memorial Day type numbers there over the weekend, and but only one locality in Florida opted to close its beaches down again for overcrowding. Naples apparently couldn't take it anymore. But they said record amounts of visitors, record amounts of garbage, by the way, left behind on the beaches. So not only are people anxious to get back there, they are anxious to get back there and ruin it for anyone else who might want to join them. But, that's today's conservatives for you. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here and presumably ready and anxious to go. So why don't we turn things over? Good morning, Greg. How are you?
We're fine, thank you.
Okay. You been to the Connecticut beach today?
No, actually, it's only 46 degrees. It was in the high 30s when I woke up.
Well,
so
we're
no,
on it.
today's
Jeez.
not a beach day. And actually, there was just some data I was reviewing, which I think I sent you at the very second to last thing there.
Okay, now I will review it.
About people who move around and people who don't move around.
Okay.
And it turns out that people who are not moving around very much happen to be Democrats. People in Democratic counties have stopped moving around far more than have people in Republican counties, even controlling for policies and disease threat. So there's a partisan gap in following the stay-at-home orders, which we can see by simply looking at the Wisconsin Supreme Court, because you don't get any more partisan than that.
True.
And that's why you got your 4-3 decision right there.
I think we also would have to note for the record that this was vacating the stay-at-home orders was a decision handed down by the Supreme Court remotely from home.
Yes, where they're safe.
Yes. So
and you see small things and big things. This one is AP this morning. Michigan strikes back by suspending elderly barber's license. State regulators on Wednesday suspended the license of a 77-year-old Michigan barber who insisted on cutting hair despite an order to stay closed during the pandemic. He pledged to keep his shop open until Jesus comes.
Well,
so if Jesus had his hair cut then, I guess you could close it. A judge declined the state's request to shut down the shop without first holding a hearing. Regulators took a different path by suspending his license. So I think that's kind of important because the political people are going to posture, but the public health people within a state have a lot of power, and they themselves can actually shut this stuff down.
Okay.
Now that's relevant because the Republicans want to have a convention in North Carolina.
Okay. Yes.
Right? And the governor, Roy Cooper, said, I don't know. And it turns out that the public health people may say, I didn't ask you. I'm telling you.
I see.
So those regulatory parts are something to watch for.
Okay.
Just saying. Other stuff that happened just this morning, another 3 million Americans filed first-time claims for unemployment benefits last week. The 8th straight week of million-plus claims, as a reminder. Before this period, the most claims ever filed in a week was 695,000 in 1982. On a not seasonally adjusted basis, which is probably a better measure given the unprecedented nature, claims last week was still catastrophic 2.6 million. And these figures do not include filings under the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which expanded eligibility to people. And we don't know when the layoffs occurred. But over the last 8 weeks, at least 33 million people, if not more, have filed for unemployment. And remember that unemployment claims understate the damage in the latest SurveyMonkey poll that the New York Times did, only 45% of people who said they'd apply for benefits actually reported being successful. So it might be twice that.
Okay.
So that's kind of scary. And that's the background for Obamagate.
Oh, that. Yes.
Or as Slobbering Goober, as he calls himself on Twitter, with a wonderful Monty Python picture of Michael Palin. Obama left Trump a pandemic plan and then told Trump to his face not to hire traitor and liar Mike Flynn. That's Obamagate right there. In other words, trying to distract from what's actually going on. There was a pandemic plan, and the thing about this whole stay at home and whether you pay attention, don't pay attention, protest, don't protest, all of it, the 2 months worth of it, was designed to give us some time so we could put together a test and trace program, which we have not done. And Rick Bright from BARDA is going to be testifying on the Hill today about exactly that we've done nothing, we've wasted all that time, and that the situation is fairly dire if we don't do more than we're doing right now. So it doesn't mean that everybody's going to have a New York City-style amount of disease, but every small rural county and town has some plan for what they do with their elderly, be it nursing home or otherwise. I mean, the point I'm making is these are risk factors. Prisons, the elderly, hospitals, these are all at risk in rural red areas, red as opposed to blue areas. And the idea that they get away with it because, like, everybody's been lying about it is just not likely. And so, yeah, you have to wait until June to see what happens. But prematurely declaring victory is not a smart thing to do. So naturally, that's what Trump is doing, and then blaming Obama for it if it doesn't work.
Okay.
So that's basically what's going on here. Alexandra Petri had a great piece today. Obamagate was the worst crime ever committed, and here's what it was. And she tries to explain it, but it's kind of difficult, so follow with me here if you could, okay?
All right.
Obamagate was the biggest political crime in American history by far, a fact that Barack Obama did not hesitate to tell Richard Nixon, causing him to shed tears in an as yet unreleased tape. It was bigger than Teapot Dome, bigger than anything anyone blamed Ulysses Grant for allowing the people who surrounded him to do. Nothing could be worse. It went all the way to the top, where Obama floated inside a sinister Masonic eye at the apex of a pyramid on the back of a dollar bill, holding all the strings. I'm looking for the balanced on the back of 4 turtles here, but I couldn't quite find that. But it's pretty close to it. I mean, it's pretty bizarre stuff.
Yeah, it's a total upside down
Also,
world.
she points out, which is very important and people tend to overlook, Obama's still president to this day, which is why everything that goes wrong is his fault.
Yes, if not Clinton.
But that'll change soon. Donald Trump is here and can point this out. The rule of law suffering from the people in charge of the government. Their pandemic response has not been all that it could be hoped. It's a total disaster and an absolute fiasco, what's going on in the White House right now, or otherwise known as Obamagate. And everybody knows exactly what it is.
Well, I hope so.
Except nobody knows exactly what it is. Or, this one from Politico, from Jack Schaefer. Why Trump is peddling extra-strength conspiracy theories. The president's doubling his dose of outrageous claims because he worries his audience isn't responding like it used to. You got to keep upping the bread and circus.
I see.
Very interesting theory there.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah. The theory about why Trump has come up with this other theory, yes.
And why he's doing it now.
Yeah, I mean...
Why don't you wait till the fall? Why are you doing this now? He didn't do the caravans until right before the election.
I don't know. There may be no strategy. He's just bored.
Maybe. Bill Scher has an idea. He says, here's the shorter election 2020 situation.
All right.
Democrats say Donald Trump mishandled the pandemic, contributing to over 80,000 deaths. You better make that 100,000.
Yeah.
And an economic collapse. And Republicans say Joe Biden was mean to Michael Flynn. Okay? So that's clear.
Okay. So depending on, how you feel about treason versus mass death.
Well, there's some interesting political science literature being published, which basically says everybody knows Trump is lying, even his own team.
Okay, yeah.
But for those people who know he's lying, they don't really care because, he's owning the libs.
Yeah. Apparently that makes a difference to them.
Yeah, apparently it does. Well, let's get back to reality, though, because there's a lot of polling going on here.
All right. You name it. What do we have?
All right. You name it. Okay. CBS News poll this morning.
Okay.
43% believe President Trump is doing a good job handling the coronavirus outbreak.
That's silly.
Sounds like more than should be, right? But in March it was 53. In April it was 48. and now it's 43.
Okay.
It's going to fall by 5% every month. I don't know. We'll see.
I guess so. It'll be interesting to watch when we top that 100,000 thing. Although he's working hard to pretend that numbers are wrong too. So
yeah, just 38% trust the president for coronavirus information. More trust Vice President Pence, Fauci, their own governor. A little more than a third of independents trust the president on the issue. Fauci 62, your governor 61. Now remember, they're going after Fauci now. They decided that they don't like Fauci.
Right.
39% Pence, 38% Trump.
Well, that's pretty low, and I guess the lowest. Did they find anybody that would poll lower? I don't have any idea who they could find who would poll lower on trusting that would have any numbers.
Larry Kudlow, maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. People probably don't know who he is. Hamburglar. I got no idea where they would go for someone lower. But as president, you're supposed to be, near the top.
Supposedly, especially in the middle of a rally around the flag situation. Yeah. Republicans trust Trump 85-15. The fact that 15% don't is actually pretty bad. Yeah. Dems 8% don't, 92% do. Those 8% probably live in the Florida Panhandle. And independents 36-64. So those are not particularly good numbers for Trump.
Yeah. Back in 2 weeks.
Now, this poll finds a majority of Americans trust Fauci for coronavirus, and a plurality have a favorable view, 46 favorable, 14% unfavorable. Not sure, haven't heard enough is 40. I don't know how you could not be sure given all of this. So the total trust is 62, don't trust 38. That's 51-49 on Republicans and 83-17 on Democrats. But unfavorable views of Fauci among conservatives have doubled since last month from 12 to 31. So he has his audience. But as we have said ad infinitum, ad nauseum, the base isn't big enough to win with. So he's going to convince the base. The base is going to want to own the libs. They'll just say, okay, Fauci's a lib. That's all you need to say. You don't need to know this. You don't have to do this, character assassination. Just say that, because that's what this is all about. Now, the important stuff. Top priority for the country should be stay home and slow virus spread, 65. Back to work, get economy going, 35. It's 38-62 with Republicans, but 88-12 with Democrats. Yeah. And Americans overwhelmingly agree people have a personal responsibility not to spread and protect others from the virus. 78% are far more likely than Democrats. Republicans are 78%. Democrats are 39, or independents 52, to say people also have a personal responsibility to go back to work to help the economy. So I think actually Democrats are wrong there. They both matter. It's just that you have to do this in terms of a context. The trouble with all of this is that Trump has no plan. He has no vision for how we're supposed to fix this. You could go back to work carefully if you do it in context with testing and tracing, and then slowly open up as your numbers drop and as you keep an eye on keeping the R0 1 or less. That's the whole idea of all of this. Protect Granny, don't throw her under the bus. So, it's kind of a false dichotomy to say it's either or. But nonetheless, most people are looking at this and saying, this isn't over and we haven't won. The prioritizing containment says it's a tough trade-off by 3-1. They say the economic damage is big, but that the health risks are bigger.
Yeah.
For those prioritizing the economy, trade-off looks a little easier. Most believe the economic damage is high and the risk of virus is low.
Okay.
Well, that'll change as you open up, so we'll see. How is the response going? A little more than a third think it's going well. When will things return to normal? Might be a year or longer, most believe, even those who think it's going well. People who think it's going badly, 60%.
Yeah.
Okay. A large majority favor a virus testing and tracing program. They're probably under the illusion we have one. We don't. Do you wear a mask? Always, 44%, most of the time 25%. So that's a healthy chunk of the American public that does. Once in a while, 15. Never is only 11. And I think they're all in Michigan at the Capitol, which I think they're going to protest today, even though the place is closed. They probably don't know that.
Oh, well, it doesn't really matter when you're protesting. The idea is to be seen walking around.
Yeah, but it's safer if you're not there, if everybody walking around happens to have a gun. Read the full results of the new CBS News poll starting here. Coronavirus Trump handling, again, down 10 points from March 2 months ago. And that's not the only polling that's going on. We also have the Navigator Research poll, day 38. Trump approval for his handling of the pandemic at a new low in our now nearly 8-week time series at 41%. 55% disapprove, so that's matches the high, but 41% think he's doing a lousy job on the pandemic. That's a new low. Jared Kushner calls the Trump administration's coronavirus a success story. The American people don't share that sentiment. 38% say it's been a success, 51% a failure. Even among the GOP base, only 16% say it's a big success.
Okay.
In our tracking of Trump critiques, here are the top 5 among a dozen tested, all rating about 60%. Top 5. This is like a Dave Letterman thing. Donald Trump downplayed the threat of the coronavirus early on, letting it get worse. Donald Trump has too often made decisions that have ignored or overruled the advice of health and medical experts. Donald Trump continues to downplay the health risks. Donald Trump is often blaming others. And Donald Trump's words and actions are putting people's lives at risk. All of those come in at or about 60%. The highest one is downplay the threat at 61. The lowest is putting people's lives at risk at 57. So when you say Donald Trump lied and 100,000 died, actually 57% of the country agrees with that right now, and we haven't hit 100,000, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's going to be a big deal when we turn that ticker over. And
the one that we were supposed to never get to, because 10, 15, maybe 0. And it'll be gone by April, said Elon Musk.
Yes, right.
It's also clear that the public is concerned about Trump's approach to reopening, both in terms of opening too soon before we're ready, and in terms of his failure to put in place adequate public health solutions to open safely. I think people realize that when they have to go back and do it themselves.
Yes.
Right?
And they're called
a truism of the Trump presidency is not to get distracted when Trump goes off on his latest Twitter rant. Same is true now. Voters far are more concerned that he's not taking responsibility for the problem than that he's distracted with petty fights. They don't care. That's entertaining. That's got nothing to do with what people really think.
Okay.
Some of the things at the top of the list that raise concerns are also ignoring intelligence briefings, blocking CDC guidelines, firing experts, and, of course, injecting bleach.
Yeah, that's
that Trump getting tests doesn't really bother people. And that's fine. He can test anybody he wants. The problem is nobody else can get them.
If they work.
Oh, by the way, they don't work.
Oh, well then. Yeah, that's true.
There was the new Abbott rapid test data coming out saying that 45% of the time they don't.
45. What's that? Nearly half?
Isn't that Trump's presidential number or something?
It's more than half are correct. I mean, come on. That's the majority.
Yeah, more or less 50-50.
Okay. I can't wait to see the so-called germaphobe's face when he finds that one out.
Right.
Well,
so, Amy Walter had a very interesting observation, which you would know if you ever shop at all, ever.
I do. What are you accusing me of? I don't
I'm
do
just
my
saying.
half of the work here?
It's just one of those things that become obvious when somebody points it out to you.
Oh,
a group we were already watching closely, a swing in 2020, will be even more critical in today's coronavirus crisis.
Yeah.
Non-college white women.
Non-college.
The people who were at the grocery store taking your money or taking your money when you go to a store. As we know, the shutdown has impacted service industry more than any other, which is predominantly female. We also know that continued school closures are going to have a disproportionate impact on women with kids. These voters were already less supportive of Trump than their male peers. Will that gap grow? Okay. Remember, Trump is telling people, don't worry, there's nothing wrong. Send your kids to school. I promise you they won't die.
Yes, he does say that.
And now, it's now a full week of this new multi-system inflammatory disorder resembling Kawasaki's disease. Has been on at least NBC Nightly News every night for a week.
Yes,
I believe the reason they're doing that, even though it's relatively rare, is to alert parents and pediatricians or ER docs when you see this, think coronavirus. I think it's like a PSA guised as a news story because it's the same people that keep showing video of in the same story in a rare situation. Nonetheless, people are getting the message because adults learn by repetition. Let me say that again. Adults learn by repetition. So if you keep putting the same story on every single night for a week, people start to get it that maybe the kids aren't totally invulnerable.
Yes.
And this is at the time that Trump is trying to open the schools. So you have those two juxtaposition stories there.
Good.
And that's a problem, and that's why Amy's talking about the particular group of people who, may not be totally into let's do Obamagate right now, because that's the most important thing in the world. What about my kids?
Right. If you have them, they are important to you in large part. Most people. A lot of people are apparently willing to make them soldiers for America. But I don't know. Yeah, all right, well, I'm glad we brought this thing up early on, and, I think we got proper warning about how common or how uncommon it actually is. But, yeah, I guess they're doing the right thing. It is odd that they keep showing the same people over and over, but that's because there just are far too few to really feature very many of them. But, yeah, I mean, at this point, that's the way news is getting disseminated, and people need to know, hey, if my kids don't feel right, but they're not coughing or showing all the classic symptoms that adults have exhibited, I don't know what to do. And in this time, you can't just run to the doctor or the urgent care. So,
right.
It does heighten your interest in what's
after
happening.
the break. I think maybe we'll do the curious cases of Jonathan Fair and Donald McNeil.
Okay, I'm curious as to what their cases are. But,
yeah, Jonathan Fair is NBC contributor, virologist, who happens to be in the hospital right now with coronavirus. Which he got on a plane.
What was he? How come he got on a plane?
He was gowned. He was gloved. He was going to work. He said the plane was crowded. I did everything. Obviously, I did something wrong. I'm an expert on this, so it's easy to do, just to show you.
Okay.
And Don McNeil is the longtime New York Times correspondent for health and science, who had his own feelings about how the U.S. is screwing up, and the Times yelled at him for telling people that the government was really screwing up. So we'll handle that after the break.
Yeah, those are curious cases. We will. All right, we'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And we are back with Greg Dworkin. We were just chatting behind the scenes. Yeah, I do see his mask. There he is. The curious case of, one of the two curious cases. First being Joseph Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do see, we were talking also briefly about the unmasking business in the background, but not in the Flynn sense. Everybody else, I guess. But here he is in his oxygen mask.
So that's a special oxygen mask. If you see the picture of Joseph Fair, if I said Jonathan, I misspoke. His name is Joseph Fair, who tweeted, "My friend's wondering where I've been. I came down with COVID-19 and I'm hospitalized. I'm on the other end of it, but not out of the woods. Please continue to social distance. I used max precautions and still managed to contract it. Back as soon as I am able. Stay safe." And it's him lying in bed, and he's got a mask over his face. And at the bottom of the mask is a plastic bag, which looks like an old-fashioned water bottle or a whoopee cushion. And what that is, that's called a non-rebreather mask. And that delivers a much higher oxygen level than a simple nasal cannula would, which gives you an idea he's sick.
I guess so, yeah. What is all your exhaled breath go into the bag?
Well, yeah. The bag acts as a reservoir, and so it basically allows for higher oxygen concentrations to come in rather than just blowing it in your face. But the bottom line is when you see a bag like that, you're sick.
Okay.
Right? You don't usually put that on somebody unless simple measures like room air or a nasal cannula or even a simple oxygen mask aren't enough.
Okay, so he needs extra.
So he needs extra help
Okay.
there.
Bags are
without
bad.
getting too technical about it. But you can deliver 60 to 80% oxygen, and they're useful when people have low oxygen levels. And it's, I can give you a whole dissertation about how they work and when they work. That's not the important thing. The important thing is in the picture. The guy is sick.
Yes, I think that'll do for now, even though there's only one rubber band on this mask, and there should be 1,500 of them if you really... Yeah, but, there's another one.
It's not the same kind of mask, remember.
Right.
It's not protecting him from you.
Right.
He already has it.
That's the number of rubber bands. That's how you can tell how serious they are about protecting themselves. There is another one, but they're not using it. But okay, I know that's not really what we're talking about here. Okay, the bag. Don't want to be seen with bags attached to you. That's going to make you look sick. Okay.
Right. Then the other story there was about McNeil, who, not McNeil Lehrer, but...
yeah, I think he's dead.
Yeah, but McNeil is actually a big-time news reporter. Veteran New York Times health reporter Donald McNeil has been covering the hell out of the novel coronavirus since it first emerged, says Dan Frumkin. His articles are must-reads, the product of an incredible depth of knowledge and multitudinous interviews with top scientists across the globe. Wow. If you had to pick 2 or 3 reporters to follow and nobody else, it would be probably Ed Yong from Atlantic and Helen Branswell from Stat News and this guy.
Donald McNeil. Okay.
I mean, you're talking about the best of the best in the world.
You're out of people.
In a wide-ranging 15-minute-long appearance with Christina Amanpour on CNN on Tuesday, and there's the video and there's a transcript, McNeil spoke freely about what he's learned. He did it with authority and passion and alarm. He warned of terrifying spikes if governors reopen their states too fast.
Oh, well.
When your curve is bending upwards, you have no idea where the top is. You don't have a handle on the virus, and when their voters start to die, voters are going to get angry, angrier than the donors. And why governors don't see this, I don't understand.
Yes. He
said we need millions more tests. He rendered some pretty harsh judgments on Donald Trump, Mike Pence, and CDC Director Robert Redfield. Good. We completely blew it for the first 2 months of our response. We're in a headless chicken phase. And yes, it's the president's fault. It's not China's fault. So we lost 2 months there. And that was because of incompetent leadership at the CDC. I'm sorry to say it's a great agency, but it's incompetently led. And I think Dr. Redfield should resign. That guy sounds like me.
Yeah. Well, no wonder you enjoy him so much.
He's great.
Yeah.
Everything he says is true. He sounds just like me. He called Pence a sycophant, and for Trump, he said the real cover-up was the person in this country who was saying, it's not an important virus. The flu is worse. It's all going to go away. It's nothing. And that encouraged everybody around him to say it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing. That's the same guy who said inject yourself with disinfectant, stick ultraviolet light in your lungs. This is not somebody whose grasp of the science is even third grade level.
Yeah.
Right? So it was pretty good. And then the New York Times publicly scolded him for saying that.
Really?
Times spokeswoman Danielle Rhodes, H-A, released a statement in which she said, in an interview with Christine Amanpour today, Donald McNeil went too far in expressing his personal views. His editors have discussed the issue with him to reiterate that his job is to report the facts and not offer his own opinion. We're confident this reporting on science and medicine has been scrupulously fair and accurate.
Yeah.
And guidelines on appearing for the New York Times say, generally, a staff member should not say anything on radio, television, or the internet that could not appear under his or her byline in the Times. I would write that.
Yeah, well, I mean... I
would write that with my own name, not just his.
Submitted it, sure, right?
I would write something like that and say, by Greg Dworkin, but Donald McNeil also agrees. If you just ask him.
Yeah.
I would...
That's an interesting position to take. I mean, I'm sure Donald McNeil would say that absolutely would and should appear under my byline. It's you, the editors, who would stop it. If you don't feel comfortable with it, you don't do it.
Right. So Washington Post media critic Eric Wemple thought the Times did the right thing by giving him a reprimand. But Frumkin says when times are so dire, news organizations should worry less about activism and more about covering up the truth. I'm so mad. I'm not going to take it anymore.
Okay.
Go Howard Beale. Go full Howard.
Yeah. All right. Well, why not? You ought to do it.
McNeil was telling it like it is. His voice should not be gagged. News organizations, in other words, should loosen up to speak the truth. This is the whole view from nowhere that Jay Rosen often talks about. It's just ridiculous. and it prevents the Times from actually covering the news accurately, which is the problem. Well, you're not allowed to say they screwed up, but they screwed up. Well, that's your opinion, man.
Okay. I mean,
actually,
I don't know.
those are the facts.
Right. It happened. It's usually the thing they give us as the excuse. It happened. It has to be covered.
Yeah. Well, listen, we'll do it time style, right? He effing screwed up. Okay. He wasted 2 months while a lot of people died. He still has nothing in place that's going to fix things, but we'll refer to him as Mr. Trump.
Yes, okay.
New York Times. That's really important. That's way more important than actually holding him accountable for anything.
True. Also, opinions differ. I guess we'll add that too. McNeil needs to make note now. I mean, this happened late for him to do it.
Some experts on media felt that Donald McNeil went a little too far.
Yes. Yeah, others also feel the same thing.
Others felt he didn't go far enough.
I guess so. Right, we got a poll on that. But he also needs to add in this case of who's going to be held accountable if states open up too fast, add Supreme Courts, especially elected Supreme Courts, that are doing the job of governors instead. Everybody else...
but this just becomes an Abbott and Costello routine. But who is responsible? Well, who? Yes, that's what I said.
That's
who
right.
is responsible?
Trump already tried to blame who.
What do you mean who? Well, I'm telling you, who is responsible?
Right, and that's their favorite routine there now.
It is. Meanwhile, I think it's really worthwhile if you have time. We had the dueling Tuesday stuff. We had Fauci competing with the Supreme Court going over Donald's taxes cases. But today, I think we just have Richard Bright, who was head of BARDA. BARDA is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority.
Yes. They
are charged with getting things done quickly in problem situations like, for example, pandemics. They've been around forever. They were there back in 2008, 2009. They were the ones trying to coordinate vaccine responses on H1N1. They have a great deal of experience with this. I wouldn't say that they're political. They're absolutely the opposite of that. They do tend to lean a little bit more toward big business, depending upon who the president is. But that's not inappropriate given vaccine production, because the U.S. doesn't produce the vaccines. Private industry does, so you have to coordinate that. So that was one of those organizations which had pretty good ties to, let's say, Chamber of Commerce Republicans and president, and because they rely on private industry to do a lot of what they do. So for them to be a target of Republican criticism is weird. That's something you'd expect HHS secretary to be, not necessarily BARDA, because they work so closely with industry. And why is that important? Because industry are Republican donors.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of surprising, but Bright actually did his job. He's a career government scientist turned whistleblower who basically says he was removed from his post in response, quote, to my insistence that the government invest funding allocated to BARDA by Congress to address COVID-19 pandemic into safe and scientifically vetted solutions and not in drugs, vaccines, and other technologies that lack scientific merit. Basically, what he's saying is that not only was the hydroxychloroquine stuff garbage, but Jared was interfering with what he was trying to do in terms of doing his job. And that's why they moved him aside. That's his complaint. Now, I don't know if he named Jared personally, but everything that went wrong with the response is basically Jared.
Okay, I'm willing to accept that.
So it'll be very interesting to see if he names or talks the talk when he actually has his hearing today.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure which side I think he'd come down on. I'm sure he's getting conflicting advice about what to do, burn it all down.
Yeah, from the New York Times, for example.
Yeah, right, true. Don't get excited and call
the advice
is
Mr. You can say whatever you want. Just call him Mr. Kushner.
I guess so. That may do it.
And then I can't finish today's segment without pointing out one other big scandal, which is a weird scandal. Senator Richard Burr.
Oh, that's not weird.
He had his phone seized.
Yes.
The FBI served a warrant on a senator in investigation of stock sales.
That is
coronavirus.
unusual.
Now, we knew about that story, but here's why it's weird.
He's guilty. That's why.
Well, there's no mention of Kelly Loeffler.
That is
keep in mind that Burr is not a Trump super ally, and Loeffler is. And further, as Ellie Honig puts it, bad news for Senator Burr. To get a search warrant, a prosecutor must show and a judge must find probable cause that a crime was committed and that evidence of the crime likely will be found. Otherwise, you can't get that search warrant.
Yeah, well, it will.
Well, but let's assume he's guilty for the sake of argument.
Yeah, let's
Why?
do that.
Why is his issues with the FBI being leaked by the Department of Justice, but not Loeffler's?
She may not have any yet. That might be a problem all by itself. Well, it's a good question. My guess is
why is it being leaked at all? And if it is, why is it Burr?
He's guiltier.
Because he's not an ally.
That
and
could
that
be.
raises questions about Barr, not Burr.
Burr? Who?
Yeah.
What? Oh, yeah, right. There's only one letter difference between them. I didn't really think about that until you said that. That's not supposed to color the way things happen under the law.
That's exactly it. So, it isn't just the fact that Burr is guilty. And by the way, the Republicans are already having a problem, as we went over the show yesterday, in terms of holding on to the Senate. This isn't going to help any.
Burr.
But at the same time, and by the way it works is a Republican would, if he has to step down, a Republican would be appointed. 3 names get submitted to Roy Cooper, the governor, and he has to pick amongst the 3. So he can pick the least worst.
Yeah.
If again, the choices are, I don't know, Jared Kushner and Judge Roy Moore and somebody else, equally.
Judge Roy Bean.
Yeah, Judge Roy Bean. They got to pick one of them.
Yeah.
But why is it that Barr is interfering with this?
What else is he going to do?
Well, he's got
busy.
Obamagate to prosecute.
Somebody still has to make the rest of that up so that he knows what to do. But
it just highlights how awful
it is.
Barr is.
It's very weird. I don't
just
know.
Because Burr is awful, it doesn't mean Barr isn't awful as well.
True. Burr is guilty. I mean, there's that. So
guilty and Barr is awful.
Yeah. So it's going to be very interesting, and we have a problem in the country, and that may take us to another story later on. We have a problem in that we have federal judges who don't believe that we can depend on the Justice Department to do its job, and we find in the Flynn case, for instance, so the judge sitting in the Flynn case is just not convinced that he can do his job as a judge with a fake Justice Department coming in and refusing to prosecute obvious cases of criminal liability. But
right. So,
again,
Rick Bright will be testifying today.
Yes.
And Donald Trump tweets this morning at 8:37 a.m. to be precise. I don't know the so-called whistleblower Rick Bright. Never met him, never heard of him. But to me, he's a disgruntled employee, not liked or respected by people I spoke to, and who, with his attitude, should no longer be working for our government. Or as Walter Schaub summarized that, I've never heard of him, but I know all about him. I've never heard of, and to repeat, I know nothing about him whatsoever, but he's definitely terrible, even though I've never heard of him. And it's clear, you see, I don't know him at all, but he's bad.
All right. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, you have to send me that one. We'll include that one in the roundup. I'm going to read that one again.
Right.
All right. That's true. That's hit it on the head there. That's his usual mode of operation, of course. Okay, Schaub hits the nail on the head with that one. Oh, by the way, everyone liked the fact that we're stuck on Burr and Barr. It's like Talk Like a Pirate Day came early this year. It says Bosin good and quite correct.
Yeah. It's Bill Barr who's doing it, But really, the problem is Richard Barr.
He was always a problem and always a traitor. Barr.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's who.
Right. We can't figure it out. If it wasn't, busting him for the national security issues in leaking investigative results to the White House, I'm glad we have money insider trading.
But who did it? Every bit of it. Listen, if you are not familiar with that Abbott and Costello routine, go to YouTube and look at it. It's probably the single best piece of comedy ever.
Yes. Well,
it's
I don't
timeless.
see how you could not know.
It's 100 years old. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. All right, man. Look, some emoluments news in the breaking news. Bill Emolument. He's a senator from Wyoming. Breaking A federal appeals court says a lawsuit.
Wait. Let me guess. It's
Yes.
the hotels.
Let's see. Yes, it is. There you are. It's the hotels. Good guess.
Well, it's going to be emoluments. I mean, that's the only thing
Yeah.
that's really been in the news.
True, and the only thing that's gotten to the court so far. All right, so let me pack that one away for later discussion. And all right.
Was Richard Burr dumping stock in Trump's hotels? Is that the problem?
Oh, no, I don't think there was that. But he was dumping the stock. So was Loeffler, as you point out. I think what convinced me that he would be the first one under serious investigation was the story last week became, like Loeffler traded a bunch of stocks. Her husband traded a bunch of stocks. With Burr, not Barr, but Burr, he traded a bunch of stocks. And then also like his brother-in-law also. And it's like, all right, well, once you get past...
Oh, wait a minute. Did Chris Collins do it also? I mean,
maybe, yeah.
How deep does this go?
I guess so. I mean, maybe he was burnt once, so he hasn't done it again. But it was really interesting, and I think once it got to the point where people outside of his immediate family were also suddenly trading the same stocks while they were soaring, selling off those stocks while they were soaring at all-time highs, immediately following Burr getting this inside information. That was enough, and that's why they took his phone. They want to know
this
who
is
he
getting
called.
so confusing. So Burr was burned by Barr because of stock beers which were laid bare, right?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
What are you working at the tabloids now?
What? Who?
Okay. That should be plenty of fodder for them, though, and it'll be very interesting. I'd also be interested to see what else comes up. I imagine here's some more masking. They'll be hiding the people that they discover that he spoke to that he probably shouldn't have if he spoke to them incorrectly outside of the context of stock trading. But if he was simply spilling national security information to them, that they won't tell you about until someone asks for the unmasking of that information. And Abby wants it now. I can understand. It's exciting.
All right. Well, she's telling us, it's 9:48, so.
Yes, well, she's
Unless
inside.
It's time to go.
She'd like to trade that for outside. She's an insider trader.
Right. So I'll sign off quick, and what we
Why?
really have to find out, of
What?
course, is whether Burr or Barr know anything about Bright, or whether that's just too boring. So I'll
Are
be
they
back
barking?
on Monday, and we'll try to sum everything up. Thank you, Abby.
Burr
And,
barks.
take care and stay safe.
All right. Woof. As well. Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. We should all be barking, quite frankly. We're all barking mad about this, and why not keep going? All right, let's see. Let me catch up on some of the other comments that we got over the past hour or so. Karen was saying that it feels like we were, she says, burying the lead on the Joseph Fair story, or that perhaps the writer of the story was burying it. I don't know which, but Greg did mention this briefly and in passing before the break, and we probably should have gone back to this just by way of alerting everyone to what dangers lurk out there. She says, I feel like the lead got buried here. Dr. Fair seems to have gotten infected on a flight. That was mentioned, but there's a lot of detail that we should share. She quotes it, but maybe I can bring up his article and see how he puts it in his own words. Or is there an article attached, or is there not? Maybe there's a thread about it. Yeah, I guess there we are. I can see it now in his other responses. But Karen points out here, the flights I was on, Dr. Fair says, they said they were social distanced in their seating, but in no way were actually doing that. In retrospect, I should have gotten off the flight. Imagine the pressure, by the way, if you don't have money to burn, when you get seated on a flight and you realize, there's nothing like social distancing on this flight. And I don't know why anybody really thought it was ever going to be possible, but I guess for a few weeks there at the peak of the stay-at-home orders, maybe travelers, maybe the numbers of people actually daring to get on flights were low enough that the airlines could say, well, we'll move people around in the cabin for social distancing purposes because we can at the moment. And not because we were mandating it, but because, well, I'm sure the customers, the passengers would prefer it, and this flight is nearly empty, so what the hell, let's do it. Then when more people started moving around, or maybe they saw in the news that flights appeared to be practicing social distancing, and they were, but only because the circumstances made it easy to do, maybe they thought, it's going to be mandatory. And so flying, though risky, is a risk that we can take because we'll be socially distanced and be wearing masks, et cetera, et cetera. And then they found out, no, when people show up, the airlines don't care about social distancing anymore. They can't do it. I mean, they would have to bump so many people off the flights. It would be a disaster. But then imagine facing that possibility and then saying, if I get off the flight, I'm not certain I'm going to get my money back. I might have to buy another ticket. It might be worth it if you're worried that you're going to end up hospitalized or dying from coronavirus. But if you don't have a lot of money to burn, I don't know how you make that decision if if the alternative is crossing your fingers and rolling the dice. So, I guess she's quoting from some of his explanation here. Somebody says, you'll recall that in his tweet that Greg read, he said, I used max precautions, but still managed to contract it. So people are going to want to know, what does that mean? I was thinking of getting on a flight, and I thought I had it down, like I'll take max precautions. But will it work? And he does define it, and I don't know what the rest of his routine was like and how. I assume he knows what he's talking about, so he must be pretty clear about that being just simply the single biggest or the only existing risk factor in his life during the prior 2 weeks or so. But it's for the rest of us might be more difficult to pinpoint it like that. But here's what he says. Someone asks, I need a definition of max precautions, please. And he says, mask, gloves, frequent hand washing, and socially distanced. I don't know if that's max. It's max normal person precautions. But like, for instance, can you get on a flight in a spacesuit and be protected? Could you be on there with, when you say mask, so I've seen people get on there with, full face covered, respirators and rebreathers and whatnot, the crazy stuff, but just regular mask, gloves, maybe he had an N95 on, I don't know. Frequent hand washing, socially distanced. You can't be that frequent with your hand washing if you're wearing gloves, but whatever. The flight I was on said they social distanced in their seating, but no way were they doing that. I did not go out after getting home. In retrospect, I should have gotten off the flight. 2020 hindsight is what he actually has to say in all of this. And not much more, but I guess, if you are scheduled to fly anytime soon, at the very least, you certainly shouldn't expect that airlines are actually going to honor any information that seems to indicate that they'll socially distance people. That's just not a real possibility, and they're not going to do it. And you should expect that airlines would do their part in everything, but you should not, you'll be disappointed. You should expect to be disappointed by the airlines in this. They're not going to do things this way. All right, let's see. The Emoluments Clause news also raised by our friend Rebecca Romans, who tweets as Lamb's End Beds, as you, I think, are aware from being a fan of the show. Emoluments Clause, anyone? Let's see. She's linking here to Tegan Goddard's Political Wire, tweeting about, let's see. So this will lead somewhere else. Court revives lawsuit on Trump business dealings. Where's Political Wire getting their news from? And we'll see if we land on the same story. The Washington Post. Okay. Let's see. I have a Politico story about it that starts with the same two words, so it's difficult to tell them apart in my tabs here. Politico reports, appeals court greenlights emoluments suit against Trump. But let's go with the one that Rebecca pointed us to, because that's more exciting, because we have one of our own doing the pointing. The Washington Post's article, which I guess I'll also have to file for Pocket here. Court revives lawsuit, although they seem to have changed it. The URL said something else. Appeals court refuses to dismiss Emoluments lawsuit against President Trump. That's the URL, but I guess they changed the headline. That's exciting news. The new headline reads, Court revives lawsuit targeting President Trump's business dealings at D.C. hotel. So I guess they found themselves corrected there. Not just that they refused to dismiss it, but rather that they are reviving the suit all by itself. Let's see. Turning over here, Anne E. Marimo and Jonathan O'Connell on this story, and I think I would rather have it on this screen, so maybe we'll switch so that I don't break my neck craning it to do the reading. And a federal appeals court on Thursday, that's today, that's early, revived a lawsuit seeking to block President Trump's hotel in downtown Washington from accepting payments from foreign and state governments. So that would be both foreign and domestic emoluments clauses invoked there. In a divided decision, the court refused to dismiss, I guess they're going back to that, they just like the headline. They refused to dismiss the novel lawsuit that accuses the president of illegally profiting from foreign and state government patrons at his D.C. hotel. The case, brought by the top lawyers for Maryland and the District of Columbia, that's the one, is one of a set of lawsuits alleging the president's private business transactions violate the Constitution's anti-corruption emoluments ban. And, well, it really does. So no surprise there. All right, let's see. Why is our computer not bringing up our soundboard there? Oh, okay, just in the nick of time. But all right, we're ready to roll out the music in just a second here. And I guess we might as well wait. We were rudely interrupted by the monitor for the show-running computer deciding now's the time to go to sleep. Okay. Well, anyway, in a divided decision, they decided to revive this case brought by the attorneys general for Maryland and the District of Columbia, one of a set of lawsuits, there is another, alleging that the president is violating the emoluments ban. We recognize that the president is no ordinary petitioner, so we'll find out what kind of petitioner he is after this short break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. We'll continue with the Washington Post's coverage of the revival of the lawsuit by the Attorney General in Maryland. And is there an Attorney General in the District of Columbia, or just, maybe that's why they went with the phrasing, the top lawyers for Maryland and D.C. rather than Attorney Generals, or Attorneys General. Let's see. The court has something to say here. They, of course, as we left off, recognize that the president is no ordinary petitioner, and we accord him great deference as the head of the executive branch. Judge Diana Motz wrote for a majority of judges. That would be a majority of 2 versus 1, I suppose. But the court denied Trump's request to dismiss the lawsuit, saying it would not grant the extraordinary relief the president seeks. We are, of course, talking about a federal appeals court, so we would be talking about a panel of 3 here, unless they were sitting en banc, which they were not. All right, the ruling. Oh, well, maybe it is. Let's see, the ruling from the full U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. So, in that case, then, yes, look at this. They were sitting en banc for this, so the majority would be a much more sizable majority, not just 2. Let's get to the rest of the story. The ruling from the full U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit is at odds with a decision in March in a separate, similar case that barred individual members of Congress from suing the president over his private business. I really disagreed with that one as well. The split ruling suggests the Supreme Court will have the final word. What do you know? In the cases involving the rarely tested emoluments provision intended to prevent foreign and state officials from having undue influence on U.S. leaders, including the president. It is an unusual kind of case. Or would they say rarely tested? I don't know that it's been tested this way against the president. And the reason, of course, is no president before Trump has ever dared even get close to such a facial violation of the emoluments clauses, and there's been nothing like it. There have been marginal cases, and I don't know whether they've involved presidents or not, but keep in mind the practice to this point has been such that, I mean, everybody I think at this point knows the story of President Carter selling his peanut farm because, there was always the danger that the international peanut cartel could bribe him by buying out his each year's crop at inflated prices so that or anybody could do that. You get the idea, right? If you have a private business, you can funnel money to the president that way. I think we've heard that story, but the cases or controversies that have arisen, if any, over the Emoluments Clause are the sort of marginal things, like a president makes an overseas visit, a state visit to another country, and the country presents him with some sort of ceremonial gift. Something you might have seen in, say, you've been watching over the weekend, you were watching the movie Dave on TV, where Kevin Kline impersonates the president who's been incapacitated by a stroke, much like our president in current life. All right. Anyway, the vice president goes, he's sent abroad, and he comes back with the ceremonial gifts for the presidency, for the president, presented by the various African republics that he had visited, etc. Right? The spear and the mask. By the way, is that racist? I don't know. Anyway, they did it. And it was a movie, and it was fake, and it was from some time ago, and we could debate all of that. But at any rate, those official gifts, things like that, the president isn't permitted to keep them. They are not the personal property of the president, even if they are presented as personal gifts at the time. They have to be turned over to the Treasury, and they decide what to do with them, and they accept them on behalf of the American government. And there are opportunities when, for instance, a president might go over. These days, a president might go overseas and get from the King of Saudi Arabia or Vladimir Putin a gold watch engraved with their name on it, and it's clearly not meant to be the property of the United States of America. It might be the case that the president is personally interested in keeping the thing. Maybe not the case necessarily with various other gifts, but some of these things presidents do want to keep, and they can. They just have to pay for them. They have to essentially buy them from the United States government if they want to keep them. If they're of no particular value to the government, they can part with them. They just have to give them fair market value in exchange for them. That's the closest we've ever come to having to adjudicate this stuff, because no one has yet had the gall to flout the Constitution this way. But Donald Trump's got it. So now we have to ask the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals what to do. Okay, so where'd we leave off here? At the Fourth Circuit, a full complement of 15 judges in December took a second look at the lawsuit from Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosh and D.C., yes, Attorney General Carl A. Racine. Why not just say Attorneys General? Maybe they just don't like the phrase. An initial 3-judge panel of the same court had tossed the lawsuit and said the attorneys general, there's the phrase, did not have legal grounds or standing, you know about that, to sue. So Armando is happy. But the full court agreed to rehear the case and decide whether to take the extraordinary step to dismiss it midstream, as the president's lawyers requested. So the answer now is no. They may yet agree to dismiss it later on the same grounds, just not before the pleadings are made. Unlike past presidents, Trump has retained ownership of his private business and can benefit from it financially. His sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, run the company. Nominally. The Emoluments case centers on the President's Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue in Northwest Washington, where foreign governments, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain, have, and that's some collection, all over the world in this tiny little circle. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain have booked rooms and events since Trump entered the White House. Others have too, of course. But Trump's Justice Department lawyers say the president is not violating the emoluments clauses because they work for him. Well, actually, it says here, because the language bars only payments in exchange for official action or as part of an employment relationship. And it doesn't. But it's implicated anyway because, of course, basically what they're saying is, well, the president hasn't admitted that he's taking official action in exchange for payments. Wink, wink. But everybody kind of suspects that he is, or even outright knows that he is. But we don't have the smoking gun, and we haven't unmasked him in the phone calls to figure it out. But, how many other presidents show up as individual one in phone transcripts? Not that many. The guys, you know who you're talking about here. A district court judge in Maryland disagreed and interpreted the provisions to ban U.S. officials from accepting any gift, gain, or advantage from foreign officials. The judge signed off on more than a dozen subpoenas for Trump's closely held financial records to determine which foreign and state governments have paid the Trump Organization and how much. But the subpoenas have been put on hold pending the outcome of the president's appeal. The pandemic has forced the hotel to nearly close down completely and also put the property back in the news for potential conflicts of interest. The hotel laid off the vast majority of its staff, a total of 237 employees, according to an April 3rd filing with the D.C. government. That does not count staff from the BLT Prime Steakhouse, which has also closed. Okay, I don't know why you have to separate the two then. I thought maybe they'd be open for takeout, but I guess not. The hotel continues to operate, but at a small fraction of the occupancy it enjoyed before the pandemic forced economic shutdowns. The drop in business prompted the Trump Organization to inquire with its government landlord, another conflict of interest, the General Services Administration, and its lender, oh my God, Deutsche Bank, are you kidding me? About how to proceed given the hotel's lack of revenue. And that'll be really interesting if, for instance, the General Services Administration says, you don't have to pay rent. Don't worry about it. They're going to give him rent forbearance and nobody else. And in addition, Deutsche Bank's been lending to the Trump Organization in order to finance operations, I guess, at the hotel and elsewhere. They, too, will forbear on collecting interest and payments. Pretty amazing. Wow. So some combination. The GSA, by the way, has been a complete disgrace in all this. You'll remember that. The president's son, Eric Trump, who is running the company, while his father is in the White House, said the discussions were only preliminary and that he was not seeking any special treatments. He's just talking to the bank and the government about not taking any money from him. But the discussions prompted a number of congressional Democrats to ask the GSA whether the company was being considered for relief from its rent payments. GSA spokespersons have not responded to requests for comment. Deutsche Bank declined comment as well. Deutsche Bank, in the meantime, awaiting the decision of the Supreme Court on the hearings in their case the other day with respect to whether or not they will answer subpoenas, be permitted to voluntarily answer subpoenas from Congress about, God knows what. I can't even remember what they were asking them about. But the Trump Organization also announced in October that the company would try to sell the hotel's lease and began accepting initial bids in January. You would be, I think we heard about this too. That was kind of came as a bit of a surprise. It was such a lucrative business for him, but for him to give it up, I think it probably lets you know just how much danger they think they're in from these emolument suits. It's unclear how many companies pursued the lease, which Trump signed with the federal government before his election. One bidder was Virginia business executive Sheila Johnson, owner of luxury resorts and part owner of the Washington Mystics WNBA team. I think the Johnson family were made their initial fortune from, didn't they start BET Network? I think, I also understand that they own, a luxury resort, I think, in Middleburg, Virginia. I didn't realize that they also were part owner of the Mystics team. But okay, in late March, the Trump Organization put on hold the proposed sale of its D.C. hotel lease because of the effect of the coronavirus shutdowns on the real estate industry. Frosh and Racine, the attorneys general, have said a sale to an entity other than a state or foreign government would be the end of their case. Well, it shouldn't be. I mean, and maybe that's why they were trying to sell it more than anything else. I don't see why it should be the end of their case. Those emoluments were accepted. I mean, they were accepted while he was president, and the fact that more emoluments wouldn't be forthcoming from that hotel is no reason to stop, especially as the emoluments will just shift to Mar-a-Lago, Doral, or any other of the various properties that he owns. But, okay. In the separate case at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, right next door, Democratic members of Congress led by Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut and Representative Jerry Nadler of New York have decided not, a word is missing here, not to seek rehearing by a full complement of judges. Is that right? That's too bad. The lawmakers have until July to decide whether to ask the Supreme Court, to review the 3-judge panel decision, which blocked individual members of Congress from trying to enforce the foreign emoluments clause. Unclear why they wouldn't want en banc review at the D.C. Circuit, considering that they'd probably, I don't know whether they're going to like the outcome of a review by the relatively partisan Supreme Court either. But I think that might be one of those decisions made along the lines of, well, we kind of know that the Supremes are partisan, and maybe we don't want to have this court answer this question for all time going forward until we can get a better Supreme Court anyway to reverse this decision. But maybe it's best left unanswered so that there isn't any precedent weighing against us should we have to bring this case against the future president, but with a more favorable Supreme Court. But I don't know if I love that thinking. All right. Let's see. We'll move on. A couple of other things here to note. Yes, Ricky noting from up in Canada. I didn't think, she said, many people would be flying about the story we read about Dr. Fair and discussed with Greg earlier. I didn't think many people would be flying. Our provincial borders are still closed to all but essential travelers. But, I don't know what Dr. Fair's story was and whether or not he made the claim of being an essential traveler or whether that claim was simply not necessary here in the United States. I haven't bothered trying to fly anywhere, and I'm not likely to do that anytime soon, given what happened to Dr. Fair, although I probably would have guessed the same thing would have happened to almost anybody. Being in a flying aluminum tube with recirculated air and things just doesn't seem like it was really going to work out for the best, quite honestly, with respect to coronavirus transmission. All right, other stories. Back into pocket. I know there's a bunch of other things I want to discuss with you. Yes, there's news about Senator Burr and having his cell phone seized. Some organized thoughts presented by Jessica Sutherland over at Daily Kos. We'll borrow her interpretation of things. Senator's cell phone seized amid federal investigation of stock trades made ahead of COVID-19 spread, months after it was revealed that he had made dozens of questionable stock trades ahead of a global pandemic, and advised wealthy constituents to do the same. That sounds so good. Senator Richard Burr, Republican, of course, of North Carolina, had his cell phone seized by federal agents Wednesday night. The agents were at the senator's Washington, D.C. residence. Burr, who is a member of the Gang of Eight, you remember what they are, right? And the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, sparked scrutiny in mid-March after making 33 transactions in February that rid him of a significant chunk of his stock portfolio and netted him anywhere between $628,000 and $1.72 million, according to the Los Angeles Times. The transactions came after briefings on the potential impact of the novel coronavirus from the U.S. Department of Health. While NPR broke the story about the private warnings to rich Tar Heels, ProPublica was the first to report on the sell-off. ProPublica's analysis indicated that the February 13th selling spree was Burr's largest selling day of at least the past 14 months. That, too, I think, is something that differentiates him from Kelly Loeffler. It seems unfair, given that, the the size and remarkability, I don't know what's the word we're looking for here. The size of the sale and the unusual nature of the sale was much more clearly obvious with Burr, who, while a relatively wealthy guy, isn't nearly as big a player in the stock market as Loeffler and her husband are. They're extraordinarily wealthy. I think something in the nature of $500 million of net worth or so. And ironically, it's that wealth that might help shield her from insider trading charges. They are, she and her husband's the president of the New York Stock Exchange. They're kind of intimately tied up. Stock trades are part of their everyday lifestyle, is essentially what I think their defense attorneys would claim here. Whereas Burr made investments, but he wasn't necessarily a day trader, and he wasn't moving gigantic chunks of millions of dollars as a matter of course in his portfolio management. Whereas if you have $500 million in stock, you can move $1 million of it without batting an eyelash if you are the Loefflers. Even if it's done, as an insider trading move, it's just, it's more difficult at the outset to prove that there's something extraordinary about this trade so that you can make the link to the information being shared. It's probably true that the Loefflers, let's call them the Loefflers. I think that'll be fun because I assume that her husband doesn't go by Loeffler, but I don't know. Maybe he is the Loeffler and she's not. I don't know exactly what her situation is. Anyway, her family probably did trade on the inside information. It's just because they're so rich and do so much trading, it's more difficult to say that this briefing was the triggering event. Now, you could make that connection by saying, well, they hold stock in all sorts of companies, and all sorts of companies were headed for stock price disaster at that point, but they sold a very particular segment of their stocks and bought into. They had the compounding factor of having made purchases. Burr just looked like he was trying to escape the market and take his profits and safeguard them based on inside information. Loeffler looked not only to be taking profits from places that were headed for a particularly hard fall, but moving that money into sectors of the economy that looked to benefit from the sudden increase in demand, which should have happened a long time earlier, for PPE, for instance, by buying in Dow Chemicals. So there's other evidence that points to her being to her guilt being equally obvious. But Burr's situation it's just different. I don't know if it's necessarily an easier case. Let's go on to read the rest of this. ProPublica's analysis, as cited here, indicated that the February 13th selling spree was Burr's largest selling day of the past 14 months. As the head of the Intelligence Committee, Burr, a North Carolina Republican, has access to the government's most highly classified information about threats to America's security. His committee was receiving daily coronavirus briefings around this time, according to a Reuters story. A week after Burr's sales, the stock market began a sharp decline. Burr is not a particularly wealthy member of the Senate. Roll call estimated his net worth at $1.7 million in 2018, indicating that the February sales significantly shaped his financial fortunes and spared him from some of the pain that many Americans are now facing. You'll recall that $1.7 million, if his net worth is $1.7 million in 2018, and the LA Times says that his stock sales netted anywhere between $628,000 and $1.72 million right there. So if it's on the high end, that might have been like his entire net worth that he decided to protect in a stock sell-off, and that too will raise a different red flag than might be seen in Loeffler's case. The newest and wealthiest member of the Senate, Georgia's Kelly Loeffler, also got in on the secret sell-off, making 29 transactions that add up to millions. It's worth noting that Burr is just one of 3 senators and the only one still in office who voted against the 2012 Stock Act, which, as McClatchy puts it, explicitly prevents members of Congress and their staffs from using non-public information for insider trading. Well, no wonder. He had plans to do it, I guess. Both the FBI and the DOJ have refused comment, as has Burr's team. However, as the LA Times notes, the search warrant indicates a significant escalation in the investigation into Burr's possible violation of the Stock Act. But who cares? I didn't believe it should have been passed in the first place, so therefore you have to drop the charges against me. Why not try that? It's a fun pleading. All right. I thought I would share that one with you. It'll be interesting to watch. And I guess eventually, if he turns Trumpy enough, Bill Barr can move to drop the charges, maybe at the direction of the president, maybe of his own volition. I don't know. All right. We mentioned to you, yes, that the Wisconsin Supreme Court's conservative majority had struck down the stay-at-home order. The good folks over at Vox reporting on that one. Did I, was that the one that made mention of this thing? I don't think so. Okay. Well, I had another Vox article in mind, and I guess I didn't put it directly in there, but I put one of my tweets that contains it. But anyway, that also contains some interesting analysis. Maybe we'll spend the time prior to the break reading about that. Ian Millhiser usually does a pretty good job in analyzing these things. He's done it for Vox here. The keynote here is in the subheader, lame duck Justice Daniel Kelly, who just lost that election that they forced everybody out for, who just lost election in a landslide, cast the deciding vote in Wisconsin's decision to overturn the governor's stay-at-home order. What a very strange situation. Thanks, lame duck. He's going to kill people on the way out the door, and then what happens? I don't know. Then you'll have to find out where he lives and protest outside his house, I guess, since that's something they do there. On Wednesday evening, Republicans on the Wisconsin Supreme Court issued a broad order striking down that state's stay-at-home order, which was issued by the head of the state's health department, to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Among other things, the court's decision concludes that the state health department exceeded its authority by instructing people to stay at home and by forbidding travel and closing businesses deemed non-essential. I don't know whether this has to do with the governor not putting his name to it in their stead or what. The case is called Wisconsin Legislature, which apparently somehow has standing to sue about this, even though federal legislators don't seem to get the same courtesy in the federal courts. Wisconsin Legislature v. Palm. The court's order was 4-3, with Justice Brian Hagedorn, a Republican initially appointed to a lower state court by former Governor Scott Walker, writing one of 3 dissenting opinions. Justice Daniel Kelly, a lame duck who recently lost an election to retain his seat by nearly 11 points, cast the key 4th vote to strike down the stay-at-home order. If not for a Wisconsin law that allows Kelly to serve until August, the stay-at-home order may well have been upheld. What do you know? The decision appears to be animated by the kind of political considerations that are more at home on conservative talk radio than in a court of law. During oral arguments last week, when a lawyer defending the stay-at-home order pointed out that there was recently an outbreak of coronavirus in Brown County, Chief Justice Patience Rogensack, remember her? I think we mentioned her on the other day. She dismissed the significance of that outbreak because it primarily impacted factory workers. I don't know if we actually got to read about this on the air, but I noted about it on Twitter, but let's talk about it. This was pretty amazing. The outbreak in Brown County, dismissed by Chief Justice Patience, Rogensack. These were due to the meat packing, though, Rogensack said. That's where Brown County got the flare. It wasn't just the regular folks in Brown County, which of course triggered everybody to think that, what she's doing is she's saying, it's immigrants and brown people who work in the meatpacking plants in Brown County, and we don't care about them. Not regular white people like Wisconsin is full of ordinarily, but the secret enclave of brown people who toil inside the meatpacking plant to keep us all fed. We don't care about them. They're not regular people, whiteys like the rest of us. They're weird and brown and come from another country, and they deserve what they get, essentially. Oh, I got the wrong break music queued up there. It sounds the same, but it's a different length. Anyway, I thought that was really particularly interesting, and meant originally to make comment on it on the show when it happened, because it's really pretty amazing that in Wisconsin, home to Green Bay, of course, all of a sudden the elected Chief Justice, Republican Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, says, oh, we don't care about the people getting sick in the meatpacking industry. Who cares about the packers? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. All right, we'll continue reading Vox's explainer, as it always is, of what happened in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But, I felt like I ran out of space to adequately express my shock and indignation here that the Republican Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court has the gall in the middle of all this to say, F the Packers, which is ordinarily a lousy position to take for an elected official in Wisconsin. But everybody forgets, I guess, what they mean when they refer to the Green Bay Packers. But yeah, they're absolutely named for the meatpacking industry that is, a big part of the Wisconsin economy. But screw that, now that brown people do that work. Anyway, at that same oral argument, Justice Rebecca Bradley compared the state's stay-at-home order to assembling together and placing under guard all those of Japanese ancestry in the Assembly's centers during World War II. What's happening in the background today that's going on? Okay. All right, well, that now being over, the majority opinion by Chief Justice Rogensack is not at all clear as to whether this decision takes effect immediately or whether the stay-at-home order remains in effect for another week. Rogensack also concludes that Andrea Palm, the head of the state's health department, exceeded her lawful authority. But then Rogensack's opinion contains this extraordinary line: we do not define the precise scope of DHS authority under Wisconsin Statute 252.02 3, 4, and 6. Why? Because clearly Order 28 went too far. And that's a pretty awfully vague way of resting your case, essentially. The Chief Justice's opinion basically says, we don't know what authority they actually have. We just know it when we see it when they go too far, is essentially what they're saying here. Thus, as Hagedorn, I'm not certain how that name is pronounced, but as is noted in the dissent, the majority opinion, quote, has failed to provide almost any guidance for what the relevant laws mean and how our state is to govern through this crisis moving forward. Wisconsin now has no stay-at-home order preventing the spread of coronavirus, or maybe it does have such an order for just one more week, and it's not at all clear which powers the state health department still has to fight the spread of a pandemic. Moreover, one consequence of the court's decision is that if Palm does not want to take additional steps to fight the spread of a deadly disease, she will likely need to jump through a series of procedural hoops that at best take weeks to complete, which means she can't have an effective voice in any of this because, time is of the essence here. And her decisions can now be overridden by Republicans in the state legislature. In the meantime, there is no court decision ordering coronavirus to stop spreading. So we have that problem. Wisconsin law gives the State Department of Health Services extraordinarily broad power, or at least it did until today, when we all found out we were wrong, to confront a public health crisis. Among other things, the department may close schools and forbid public gatherings in schools, churches, and other places to control outbreaks and epidemics. It actually says that already. It may issue orders for the control and suppression of communicable diseases, and these orders may be made applicable for the whole or any specified part of the state. And on top of all that, an additional provision permits the health department to authorize and implement all emergency measures necessary to control communicable diseases. That's pretty clear, right? Yet the majority opinion in Wisconsin legislature diminishes this power considerably by imposing procedural limits on POM's authority. Much of Roggensack's majority opinion rests on a distinction between rules and mere orders. The reason this distinction matters is that a mere order from a state agency can go into effect immediately, but a rule can take weeks or even months to promulgate. You have to have the comment period, et cetera, just like the federal rules. Even under an expedited process for emergency rules, a state agency must first draft a statement of the scope of the proposed emergency rule. That statement must be reviewed and approved by the governor and the State Department of Administration, and then appear in an official state publication that only publishes once a week. After the statement is published, the agency must complete a 10-day waiting period before it is allowed to move forward, with no apparent way to waive this requirement. And then the rule can be delayed even longer if certain legislative leaders require the agency to hold a public hearing on the new rule. Then the new rule can potentially be suspended by a legislative committee, which may require the agency to start this process all over again. Nevertheless, the court's Republican majority concludes that POM's stay-at-home order exceeds her power to issue mere orders. Under the court's decision, any order that applies to a class of people that is described in general terms and that can be expanded to more individuals must be issued as a rule. That means new efforts to fight the coronavirus are likely to be delayed for weeks or more. It also means, by the way, that there's no way Wisconsin can effectively fight a fast-moving pandemic now or anytime in the future. Unless, the court is of the same party as the governor's administration. Then they'll be allowed to, I'm sure. And probably only if they're Republican. There are several problems with the court's conclusion, but the biggest one is that it is inconsistent with the text of the state's public health law. That law gives the health department the power to promulgate and enforce rules or issue orders for guarding against the introduction of any communicable disease into the state, or for the control and suppression of communicable diseases, which is what's happening here. And it provides that any rule or order may be made applicable to the whole or any specified part of the state. Thus, the statute explicitly states that the health department may issue an order and not just a rule that is applicable to the entire state. Done, right? Apparently not. You're pretty wrong. As Justice Rebecca Dallett notes in one of 3 dissenting opinions, the state legislature purposely added this language to the state's public health law to expand the health department's power to issue statewide orders. Originally, Dallett writes, the state public health law did not allow for the issuance of orders. DHS could only adopt and enforce rules and regulations, and these rules had to comply with limits similar to the ones the state Supreme Court imposed in this case. But in 1982, at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, the legislature amended the public health law to explicitly include, as part of DHS's power, the ability to issue orders of statewide application. So the state legislature explicitly amended the law during a previous public health crisis to give the health department a broad power to issue statewide orders. The court's decision in Wisconsin legislature effectively nullifies the 1982 amendments. Oh my God, they're writing laws as judges. They are activist judges. Acting legislators, one might even say. We can just pull out our favorite sound effect for that. Anyway, it is kind of plain on its face that this was done. In other words, the Wisconsin Supreme Court says the legislature and general government of Wisconsin is not allowed to draw lessons from the way it has reacted to public health crises in the past and improve upon those processes. At the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, they found themselves without the power to issue rules to tamp down on the spread of a communicable disease that was ravaging the community, or posed the threat anyway of ravaging the community as it had elsewhere, and they corrected for that. And the court says, yeah, well, we want you to uncorrect because I want to get my nails done, I guess. All right, well, having stripped the state's health department of much of its authority and having done so in the middle of a pandemic, the majority opinion then descends into confusion. From there, let's get to the confusion. For one thing, it is not at all clear if the court's decision takes effect immediately, though they think so over in the bars, or if it does not take effect for several days. Although the Republican-controlled state legislature, which is the plaintiff in the case, requested a 6-day stay of the court's decision, the majority opinion doesn't grant that stay. Nevertheless, Rogensack, who wrote the majority opinion, also wrote a separate concurring opinion where she states that although our Declaration of Rights is effective immediately, I would stay future actions to enforce our decision until May 20th, 2020. So it's unclear whether Rogensack voted to grant a stay or not. She authored the majority opinion, which does not grant a stay, but she also wrote a vague concurring opinion saying that she would stay enforcement of the court's decision. Now, I mean, I guess they could have done, if a majority of the court had joined in her concurring opinion, which would have, of course, made it the majority opinion, then I guess you could argue that there really was a stay. But it's just one justice saying, I would do it, but I'm not going, I would, but I won't. What a weird thing to do. I'm willing to, but no one's going along with it, apparently. Certainly not the majority, although it would have included it in the majority opinion. Rogensack's decision to cast Schrodinger's vote inspired an incredulous dissent from Justice Ann Walsh Bradley. Assuming Chief Justice Rogensack is actually voting for a stay, as her concurrence seemingly indicates, there appear to be 4 votes for issuing a stay. The dissenters would stay it too, right? Chief Justice Rogensack, Justices Ann Walsh Bradley, Dallett, and Hagedorn. Bradley, right? So is there a stay or isn't there? It can't be both ways. Similarly, after Rogensack's majority opinion concludes that the health department must use a rule and not a mere order if it wants to hand down something like the stay-at-home order, Rogensack then tacks on several additional pages concluding that the health department's power to issue rules must also be limited as well. What do you know? That's the section that concludes with a declaration that we do not define the precise scope of DHS authority, and it's the section that inspired Hagedorn to write that the majority has failed to provide almost any guidance for what the relevant laws mean and how our state is to govern through this crisis moving forward. The plaintiff in this lawsuit is the Wisconsin State Legislature, which is controlled by Republicans, but the Wisconsin Legislature is one of the most egregiously gerrymandered bodies in the nation. A good reminder here at the end. In 2018, Democratic candidates received 54% of the popular vote for the Wisconsin State Assembly, but Republicans won 63 of the body's 99 seats. So you see, 54% of the vote was Democratic, but Republicans got 63% of the seats out of that somehow. Similarly, it is likely that the reason the court did not vote 4-3 to uphold Wisconsin's stay-at-home order is that Justice-elect Jill Karofsky, who defeated Justice Kelly in an April election, had not yet taken her seat. Because Kelly will continue to sit for months as a lame duck, the state health department has now been stripped of much of its power to fight a deadly virus. Congratulations, Republicans. They really, really want to own all this death for some reason. All right, well, we'll keep that in mind. And let's see, there's another Vox explainer that caught my attention as well. And on a slightly different note, but also having to do with, of course, the coronavirus. Oh, look at that. They got rid of the story. I wonder why they did that. That's too bad, because it now undermines the interesting claim that they were making. I wonder if they decided to park it elsewhere. Can I find... That's interesting. Let me see if they just move the URL or not. Let's see. Let's see. I have to find a key phrase here and see if I can find. Let's see. All right. Well, here I think this is. Yeah. Did they just change the URL? Is that all? Let me see. What is this one called? Testing, quarantine, masks, stimulus. All right. So originally what happened here was, that is very odd. Okay. Well, at any rate, I found the article, so now we can reconstruct things. I found this bit here for Vox. Matt Iglesias wrote it, and I guess it got moved around. Experts, 7 best ideas on how to beat COVID-19 and save the economy. And the subheader here was, Trump could do a lot more. And I thought that's interesting, but I didn't think it was going to be read on the program unless there was some groundbreaking idea here. And there really, I don't think that there was anything that jumped out at me. One being masks for everybody. I mean, we've already heard about how that could help. And that was where what I found the interesting tidbit that I commented on. But let's see, what else? 2, accelerate vaccines on all fronts. You know, I mean, I think that goes without saying, but more and smarter testing, sure. 4, hire more contract tracers. Yeah, we've heard about that. 5, halt household spread. I don't know if I read this far into it or not, but I wondered whether this has to do with the practices in other countries of having people with coronavirus symptoms who are sheltering at home with family, having them separate themselves from the family and actually stay perhaps in hotels or dorms set aside for this purpose, because it's really almost impossible to completely isolate a person at home from and cut back on eliminate their ability to transmit the virus to others, since it'll go through the heating and cooling ducts, and it's just nearly impossible to spread it. To keep it from spreading among the family. Let's see. Number 6, let people go outside. I know a lot of people are arguing for that. And 7, just spend the damn money. I guess give people the ability to stay home rather than have to worry about where their next meal will come from and therefore go back to work. But the part that jumped out at me last night was about the masks. There was a very interesting metric that they shared. Here we are. For the broad population, the key fact is that while wearing a mask does little to protect the wearer from the risk of getting infected, unless it's an N95 mask, it does a lot to prevent the risk that the wearer spreads the virus to other people. We all are very familiar with that. Now, here's the interesting part. Consequently, it says here, an interdisciplinary Yale team featuring biologists, medical doctors, economists, and public health specialists calculates, I don't know how you calculate such things, but they do, calculates that the benefits of each additional cloth mask worn by the public are conservatively in the $3,000 to $6,000 range due to their impact in slowing the spread of the virus. And the benefits of professional grade masks for healthcare workers may be even higher. Do we get what they're saying here? What they're saying is the doctors and public health specialists and economists got together, and biologists, I don't want to leave them out of this, got together and figured out how much are we saving, I guess, in the cost of reacting to and treating the spread of the coronavirus. How much do we save every time somebody agrees, I too will cover my face when I'm in public? I will wear a mask. And the answer is every person who says I will don a mask saves $3,000 to $6,000 of public and or private expenditure in the greater economy. And by the way, it's not just expenditure. We're not stimulating the economy by saying, let's spend $6,000 on health care for somebody who gets sick from the coronavirus. You're saying, let's burn $3,000 to $6,000 on treating an unnecessary infection. Put on a $1 mask and you can fix this thing $3,000 to $6,000 worth. And I put that all together in a tweet yesterday. I was just saying, hello everybody. I'm a conservative, right? Put that in scare quotes. I'm a conservative, so I oppose covering my face because I want the economy that I care so much about saving to needlessly burn $3,000 to $6,000 taking care of people whose infections I could have helped prevent with a $1 mask. There's your cost multiplier there, and your savings multiplier. Spend $1 or $2 or $5 on a nice mask. That's fine. Buy a high-end mask. Spend $20 on a beautifully decorated mask. I'll put out $1 to $20 to put on a mask, and $3,000 to $6,000 can stay in people's pockets to spread around in the economy and use elsewhere, or just stay in your pocket if you prefer, rather than spending it on treating them for an infection they could have avoided in the first place. I thought that was pretty amazing, but somehow the conservative position is, well, but then I will look wimpy, so let's do that. So I think a good answer for that is if you want to look really tough, take $6,000 out of your pocket and set it on fire. And if you're willing to do that, then by gosh, you're a tough guy. And also only rich people can be tough in this world. That's, I guess, where we are. All right. Let me also comment, I guess, briefly on something that Trump is yelling about now, if only as a vehicle to get to the proper response to it. Trump, I guess, for whatever reason, has decided to rage tweet the following. He says, if I were a senator or a congressman, the first person I would call to testify about the biggest political crime and scandal in the history of the USA, by far, is former President Obama. He knew everything. Do it, Lindsey Graham. He addresses him on Twitter. Just do it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. No more talk. That is a, rather amazing thing for anybody to say, let alone a president of the United States or a guy who purports to be president. Sam Stein, commenting correctly, as I might in this instance. It's moments like this when I think back to how Obama's de facto position when it came to investigating the authorization and the use of torture and indefinite detention, I would add, and warrantless wiretapping, I would add, under Bush. Obama's de facto position when it came to investigating authorization and use of torture under Bush was that it was important to look forward and not back. It only took you, well, I guess, 0 extra presidents to get around to this, your own successor. As once again, I will trumpet my own participation in this in 2009 when I got the chance to sit across the cabinet room table from President Obama and next to Attorney General Eric Holder and say, this specter of Nixonian, Cheneyan, Bushian absolutism will come back with the next Republican president. And as much as I hate to admit it, they're pretty good at winning presidential elections. So the, weight of the evidence is that your successor will be Republican. This will come back only worse because we've done nothing to draw a line here. We've put out no marker. We've not put the other side on notice that they'll be prosecuted for this. They may not care. That's a possibility when we put them on notice. But yeah, that was the general reaction, of course, was no. We look forward and not back. And, I think it was pretty obvious at the time, Republicans will not reciprocate. You shouldn't expect them to. And it's not entirely clear that Obama thought they would reciprocate. It's just that he didn't want to do this thing for various reasons, some of which are very noble, but he may never have expected to get reciprocation from Republicans. I can't speculate about that, but it's still well worth noting that, that's the case. All right, let's see. Oh, I think I may have lost track of... Yeah, okay. I want to open that up and make sure that we have it and can include it in the roundup. All right, let's see. Not that much time left to talk about the many, many other things that are now piling up that haven't been discussed. Let's see. Oh, yes, I'd better hit this one as well. Something I discovered as we were closing out the show yesterday. And I don't know, did I? Yeah, I think we managed to squeeze in mention of an item that Justice was including in yesterday's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And what a story it turned out to be. And we only sort of pieced it together between the two of us after my show ended and after his, of course, had been produced already. But he had the news that was reported. I grabbed CBS's coverage of it as I read that he was going to be talking about it on the show yesterday. I said, what the hell is this story? And I went and grabbed this. CBS News, Russia bans use of ventilators linked to deadly fires after dozens sent to U.S. That sounded like a bad thing. Alexandra Odynova, Odynova, reporting this one yesterday for CBS News. Russian authorities have banned the use of one model of ventilator machine pending investigations into two deadly hospital fires. The Aventa M machines have been preliminarily linked to the blazes, which left 6 coronavirus patients dead. Some ventilators of the same model, in case you recognize the name, were sent by Russia to the United States last month, but have not been put into use. And I guess we're all kind of glad that they hadn't been put into use, although that raised the question immediately. The Aventa M machines, were those the ones manufactured by the company under sanctions by the U.S.? We remember that we reported this, back in the beginning of April, that a Russian shipment on one of their giant-ass cargo planes landed at JFK, and everybody was touting this and saying, the Russians are sending aid. Some people were embarrassed by the fact that the Russians were aiding us in all of this, but, at that moment, I think we probably all sort of welcomed at least the idea of aid, although with it coming from Putin, we had questions. And then we found out, of course, as they're unpacking the boxes, the news media that was covering the event said, yeah, these things are marked with, the boxes are marked as having originated with a company that is under sanction by the U.S. Ordinarily, we wouldn't be allowed to import these things. It's illegal to do business with this company. But, of course, I think everybody probably expected at that point that the U.S. government, particularly under Trump, obviously, would say, well, we'll waive that in view of the coronavirus emergency. And that might even be something that you can get your head around and say, all right, fine. Except, usually the companies that end up banned are banned for particularly good reason. And you might have thought, this is kind of strange and icky, and I don't know how well this is going to work out. Now, of course, as it turns out, they weren't so much ventilators as they were firebombs disguised as ventilators, and maybe this is the reason that we were banning doing business with this sanctioned company. As it turns out, by the way, the company was sanctioned in 2014 under the Obama administration in retaliation for the invasion of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine. And the company that makes these ventilators also makes like weapons targeting systems and missile targeting systems that were in use in Ukraine. And of course, they may even have been the ones who manufactured the equipment that ended up shooting down the KLM flight over Ukraine, although I'm not positive about this, but this in fact is the case. So I guess 6 coronavirus patients were killed in 2 separate hospital fires when these things shorted out. Now, remember that we were waiving the idea, or we're supposed to waive the prohibition against importing equipment from one of these companies in light of the coronavirus emergency. And that these were ventilators that landed at JFK on April 1st, I believe, if not a day or two later. That was less than a week after Cuomo said that he may need 30 to 40,000 ventilators in New York, and Trump famously said, I don't believe you. So here are ventilators landing, and you'd think, those things should be dispatched immediately. And I guess we're glad that they weren't, because they were going to blow up. So you might have wondered, why is it that, we're glad we're able to say, phew, we never put them into use in the U.S. Why didn't we, if we were under such a crunch for ventilators? Part of the answer may end up being that these things are, of course, they're of Russian manufacture. And over in Russia, they use 220-volt electricity. They are geared for 220, and we here in the United States, of course, use 110 volts electricity. So you couldn't use these things without some sort of electrical converter, and I'm not entirely sure that you want to run your already hinky Russian electronics that are shorting out and starting fires in hospitals on converters. So, whatever. But as it turns out, the reportage on this stuff is that all the rest, not only were the ventilators unusable for that reason, but all the rest of the, 60 tons or 600 tons of equipment that no one could decide in the news media whether we had paid or it had been donated. And they eventually settled on the compromise that it was split 50-50. None of the rest of the equipment was usable. The rest of the stuff on that plane was gas masks and garbage that could not be used anywhere for any reason, and like scrubbing gloves, like dishwashing gloves. It was of no use to anyone. Masks that couldn't be used, ventilators that couldn't be used, gloves that couldn't be used. And we paid $600,000 for them to ship this. And we only did it, remember, at the time, they were touting this shipment was only made possible because President Great Deals himself personally negotiated with Putin $600,000 worth of garbage.
From Daily
Thanks,
Kos
President
Radio
Great Deals.
on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I feel like I should have made a bigger deal out of that at the beginning of the show. That should be the scandal of the day. And why not counter-program Trump's claims that Obama-gate, or whatever the hell he's calling it, is the biggest crime in history? This was personally negotiated by Putin and the president and was totally worthless and may even have killed people in Russia. See you tomorrow.